It was a typical day in my 10th grade year, one that seemed like any other. I sat in my boring writing class, staring at the clock, counting down the minutes, until the bell would ring. I wasn't expecting anything exciting to happen that day. I was just another student passing the time, trying to make it through yet another uneventful school day. But that day would turn out to be far more terrifying than I could ever have imagined. The day had started like most others. After getting on the bus to school, I spent the morning in a haze, barely paying attention to the lessons. By the time my third period writing class came around, I was already counting the minutes until I could leave for the day. As the clock ticked on, I suddenly felt the need to go to the bathroom. I raised my hand and asked for permission to leave. My teacher, a kind but forgettable middle-aged man, nodded his consent. I made my way down the empty hallway, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the silence. The bathrooms weren't far, just around the corner at the end of the hall. I entered, glad for the brief moment of solitude. But then something happened that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I was in the middle of washing my hands when I heard the bathroom door creak open. Someone entered, but they didn't step forward. Instead, I heard a voice call out, "Is anyone in here?" Confused, I glanced around. The bathroom had multiple stalls. Why would someone ask such a strange question? I didn't respond, unsure of what to do. For a few tense seconds, there was silence. Then the door clicked shut. Whoever it was had left. I finished washing my hands and was about to head back to class when suddenly the school intercom crackled to life. "Attention students, we are now in a lockdown. This is not a drill." My heart skipped a beat. A lockdown? I'd never experienced anything like that before. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do. Should I stay in the bathroom? Go back to class? Panic crept in as I thought about the unknown. I decided it was best to return to my classroom. My teacher would probably be wondering where I was. I stepped into the hallway, but it was eerily silent. No students were around, and there was a strange stillness in the air. The hair on the back of my neck prickled as I walked down the hall, heading back toward my classroom. Then, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me. I turned around, expecting to see a teacher or perhaps a security guard, but no one was there. I quickened my pace, the footsteps growing louder and closer. Whoever was behind me was getting closer, and I could feel my heartbeat quicken with fear. The sound of the footsteps matched my own pace, getting closer with every step. Was it a teacher? Or worse, was it someone who wasn't supposed to be in the building? I turned down another hallway and tried to walk as quietly as possible, praying that whoever was following me would lose track. But the footsteps sped up, matching my every move. I was sure now that I was being followed by someone dangerous. Suddenly, I spotted a door slightly ajar, leading into what seemed like a storage closet. Without thinking, I ducked inside, shutting the door as quietly as possible. The room was dark, and I could barely make out shapes of desks and boxes stacked against the wall. I held my breath, hoping that whoever was following me would just walk past. The footsteps drew closer, so close I could hear them right outside the door. I squeezed my eyes shut, my body frozen in terror. The footsteps stopped just outside, but I dared not move. A few seconds later, the footsteps continued down the hallway, growing faint. I waited for what felt like an eternity before allowing myself to exhale. The danger had passed. At least, that's what I thought. But then, just as I was about to leave the closet and make my way to safety, I heard a noise behind me. My stomach dropped as I turned around. There, emerging from behind a stack of boxes, was a man. His figure was shadowed in the dim light, but I could tell he was close. Without thinking, I bolted for the door, pushing it open and sprinting down the hallway. I didn't look back. I could hear the man's footsteps behind me, but I didn't dare slow down. I finally reached the front of the school, where I saw a teacher walking by. I ran up to him, gasping for it. "There's a man hiding in the building," I told him, my voice trembling. We rushed toward the front office, and soon, the police arrived. Within minutes they had apprehended the man who had been hiding in the school. He wasn't supposed to be there at all. The lockdown had been triggered because of him, and I was just lucky enough to escape. Looking back, I can't believe I hid in the same room as that man. I should have just gone straight back to my classroom, but I was too scared to think clear. I never would have imagined that something like that could happen at my school. It's a memory that haunts me every time I think about it. It was a quiet day at the high school, the kind that felt almost too peaceful. As a high school teacher, I had long since learned that the peaceful days often led to moments of unexpected tension. The fifth period had just started, and I found myself in my classroom, not teaching, but grading papers. It was a warm and sunny day, and I had closed the blinds to avoid the sun glaring into my eyes. I sat at my desk, reviewing the students' assignments, when suddenly an eerie silence filled the room. It was unsettling, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. That's when I noticed something odd. A shadow flickering outside the classroom window. It was the kind of shadow that made your stomach churn, something that didn't belong. Outside, my classroom window ran along the entire backside of the room. Beyond that, there was a grassy area, a few trees and a long line of bushes. The sidewalk was farther away, but there, just beyond the bushes, the shadow of a man caught my eye. At first, I couldn't make out much of him. Just a shadow moving stealthily, walking alongside the building. I froze. The movement didn't feel right. There was no reason for anyone to be out there at that hour. I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach, a growing sense of unease. Was this the reason for the sudden lockdown? Could someone have entered the campus without permission? I couldn't be sure, but I had to make sure my classroom was secure. I recalled something. One of my windows had been open. I'd left it cracked earlier because the sun had been bright, and I didn't want the glare to distract me. But now, thinking about it, I realized that if this man was a threat, the open window could give him away inside. I glanced back out the window. The man was moving closer, now approaching the window where I had left it slightly ajar. My heart pounded in my chest. He was about to reach the window. I knew I couldn't let him see me. I had to do something, but I wasn't sure what. Quickly, I crouched down behind my desk, heart racing. I hoped he didn't hear me. I watched through the small crack in the blinds, praying he wouldn't notice that the window was open. My mind was racing, but there was no time to think clearly. I heard the man's footsteps growing louder, his hand reaching out towards the window, and then, it happened. He began to raise the window. I held my breath. My body froze. There was nowhere to hide. I could hear the man's muffled movements as he slowly pulled the window up, and for a brief moment, I could make out his arm reaching through. I ducked under my desk, the panic rising inside me. The only thing that kept me calm was the fact that the wall behind my desk was blocking me from his view, and unless he came around the side, he wouldn't be able to spot me. I could hear him moving around the classroom now. I didn't dare look up. My hands shook as I clenched them tightly together. Time seemed to stretch on forever. I could hear the man breathing, his movements slow and deliberate. Every second felt like an eternity. My head was spinning with thoughts of what to do next. Should I make a run for the door? But I was too close. Just as I thought I might have to make a break for it, I heard the footsteps again. He was moving closer. I held my breath. My body was tense, every muscle screaming at me to run, but I couldn't make a sound. The man stopped near my desk, right behind me. I could hear him breathing, but he didn't speak. For what felt like an eternity, he just stood there. I tried to stay as still as possible, and then, miraculously, I heard the door open. It wasn't him. It was a sound that gave me a faint glimmer of hope. The door was open. The man had left, or so I thought. I waited a few moments, just to be sure, and then I stood up slowly. The room was still eerily quiet. I cautiously crept towards the door, heart pounding in my chest. My hands were trembling as I locked the door back up. I quickly grabbed my phone and called the principal to inform them of the situation. It wasn't until a few minutes later that the lockdown was lifted. The police had arrived and the man had been found. He wasn't supposed to be in the school. He had somehow gotten in through another window and had been moving around the building unnoticed. It wasn't until then that I realized how close I had come to an unimaginable danger. The man outside my window, the one who had slowly crept into the classroom. It all made sense. The lockdown had been for him. I never thought I'd experience something like this at school. It was a reminder that even in the most seemingly peaceful moments, danger could be just a step away. It was a bright Saturday morning when I found myself reluctantly heading to Saturday school, a consequence of forgetting to return several overdue library books. I was in high school, a junior, and not the kind of student who got into trouble, but this time I had misplaced one of the books, and it had taken me far too long to find it. Even though I wasn't thrilled about attending Saturday school, I figured it wouldn't be that bad. It was just like study hall after all. I arrived at school just before 8 a.m. The halls were eerily quiet, and the school, usually buzzing with energy during the week, now felt like a ghost town. My mom dropped me off at the front entrance, and I made my way to the language arts classroom where Saturday school was held. Inside, there were only 4 other students, 2 of whom I recognized. The other 2 were strangers, younger kids who, like me, had probably found themselves here for some minor infraction. Mr. Sanders, our teacher for the day, greeted us with a tired smile. He was an easygoing guy, someone who made the best out of any situation. He went over the rules for Saturday school, and then told us to get to work. Most of us just had homework to do, or in my case a short paper to write about what I had learned from my library book incident. It was all very dull, but I was determined to make the best of it. Time passed quickly, and by 9:30 a.m., I had finished my paper. I grabbed a book from the shelf at the back of the room and started reading. It wasn't long before Mr. Sanders excused himself to use the bathroom. He joked that we would be fine without him for a few minutes, and with that, he left. I settled back into my reading, trying to ignore the clock ticking away. It was a peaceful silence, broken only by the occasional rustling of pages. But that tranquility didn't last. No sooner had Miss Sanders left the room than the unexpected happened. The school intercom crackled to life, announcing that we were under lockdown. My heart sank. What could be happening? It was Saturday. There were hardly any people in the building. Why would we need a lockdown? We exchanged confused looks, unsure of what to do. We all knew the procedure from the usual lockdown drills. Close the door, lock it, turn off the lights, and sit quietly in the back of the room. But there was one problem. Mr. Sanders wasn't there to guide us. We all hesitated, unsure if we should lock the door ourselves. Finally, someone suggested it. I walked over to the door, locked it, and turned off the lights. The room fell into a tense silence. We sat on the floor, trying to stay as quiet as possible. We heard nothing from the hallway, but the atmosphere in the room grew thicker with every passing second. Then, someone tried the door. They were knocking, and their voice came through muffled, but there was something about it that felt off. I walked over to the door window and peered out. Through the glass, I saw the figure of a kid I recognized from earlier, the one who had left the room just before Mr. Sanders had. He was banging on the door, calling out to be let in. I was about to open the door, thinking it was just him, but then I heard something strange. More shouting, but this time it came from further down the hallway. I froze as the words police echoed through the corridor. The kid at the door bolted, running down the hallway, and we could hear his footsteps fading. A few minutes of silence followed, but the tension didn't ease. What was going on? I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Then the door rattled again, but this time it wasn't the kid. It was someone else. The knocking grew louder, frantic, like someone trying to force their way in. The door opened a crack, just enough for us to see the police officer's face, grim and serious. The officer entered, and we were told to stay seated, as they explained what had happened. The kid who had left earlier had followed Miss Sanders to the bathroom, where he ambushed him from behind, knocking him unconscious. A janitor had witnessed the attack, and the student had fled the scene, triggering the lockdown. My stomach churned as I processed the news. I had nearly opened the door for that same student, not knowing what he had just done. Thankfully, the police had arrived in time. Mr. Sanders was okay, but the incident left us all shaken. We sat in stunned silence for the remainder of the lockdown, each of us processing the horror of what had almost happened. It was the last time I ever went to Saturday school.